In the far reaches of a quiet star system, where the light of its sun barely touched the surface of a long-dead planet, a lone research ship hovered gently over the dust-covered land. The planet had no name, just a number in the galactic archives. A forgotten place ignored by all spacefaring civilizations, labeled barren, lifeless, and of no historical value. But Terran, a human historian and archaeologist, had always believed that forgotten places often held the loudest truths, and this time he had followed a strange pattern in ancient navigational maps, which all pointed toward this very world. Had spent weeks scanning the surface and digging through layers of hardened ash and rock. Most of it was empty, dry, and silent. But then the scanners picked up a strange hollow chamber beneath a collapsed mountain. It took him 3 days to reach the place alone. He descended into the darkness with only a headlamp, a breathing mask, and a small drone for company. The chamber was enormous, its walls smooth and curved as if shaped not by tools, but by some ancient will that had long since vanished. There were no writings on the surface, no signs of who built it, but something in the air felt strange. Not dead, but waiting. As Darren stepped deeper into the cavern, the ground beneath him began to shimmer. Faintly, a pattern hidden beneath the dust responded to his presence, glowing slowly with soft golden light. A pulse of energy ran through the walls. The air changed, and for a moment he thought he heard a voice, not through sound, but directly into his thoughts. It was a whisper that said, "You are not the first to return here, and you will not be the last." The drone hovered near a large stone pillar that stood in the center of the chamber. On it were carvings not in any known alien language, but in symbols that resembled ancient Earth scripts from different cultures, all mixed together as if trying to speak to everyone and no one at once. Darren touched the pillar, and a beam of light rose from its peak, revealing an underground vault. Below the cavern floor, inside the vault, he found thousands of crystal shards, stacked carefully in circles around a central device. The crystals pulsed with color, each one containing streams of encoded memories, voices, languages, images of worlds long gone. He activated one, and the room transformed into a living archive. Holographic projection showed a star map, unfamiliar, yet hauntingly precise. It pointed to galaxies that no longer existed, and others that were still forming. But what struck Darren most was a symbol on the map that marked Earth not as a beginning, but as an endpoint, a place of arrival, not origin. He activated another crystal, and was pulled into a vision, a memory. Not his own, but vivid and real. It showed tall beings walking through the stars with pride and wisdom. Their skin varied, their features unlike any one race. They were humans, but not like any Darren had ever seen. They were older, stronger, and moved with purpose. They stood before a grand council where other alien races bowed their heads in respect, not fear, and the voice returned to speaking again into his thoughts, saying, "These are the first ones." The vision faded, and Darren stood shaking in the vault. Everything he had ever learned said that humans evolved on Earth over thousands of years, slowly rising from stone tools to starships. But these records told a different story, a story where humans were already ancient before Earth was even settled. The truth settled into his chest, heavy and burning. If this was real, then humanity did not begin on Earth. It ended up there after something had gone terribly wrong. He tried to gather as much as he could, loading crystals into a secure case, scanning carvings with his tablet, recording every image and message he could find. The A built into his suit asked if he wanted to notify the central archives back home, but he hesitated. Something about this place felt sacred, forgotten on purpose. Still, he had to report it. He had to know more. He sent a secure message to the Human Council detailing the location and findings. But within minutes he received a direct reply, not from the Council's researchers, but from a military division. The message was short and cold: cease excavation, vacate the site immediately. No explanation, no request for further data. Just silence wrapped in fear. Darren's heart pounded. He looked back at the vault, then at the sky above. He could feel the weight of something shifting across the stars, as if the truth he had touched had triggered a response across the galaxy. This was not just a discovery. This was a secret someone had worked hard to bury, and now it had started to rise again. He climbed out of the vault and stared at the landscape now bathed in twilight. His ship still hovered quietly above its lights, blinking calmly, as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Humanity thought itself young, small, and lucky to have reached the stars among so many older races. They thought they were explorers, learners, visitors in a universe much older than them. But what if they were not the visitors? What if they were the ones who had come first, the ones who had shaped the stars before being forgotten? Stood there for a long time, staring into the sky, not as an explorer, but as something else, a descendant of something ancient, something powerful, and something lost. The wind whispered again, and though there was no voice, this time he understood the message clearly. Go deeper. The truth is not yet done with you. And Darren knew this was only the beginning. The ship felt heavier when Darren stepped back inside, as if it too had sensed the weight of the truth. He now carried the soft hum of the engines. No longer felt comforting the walls around him. No longer felt like protection. They felt like prison bars, keeping the discovery hidden from the galaxy above his hands. Moved quickly, storing the data crystals inside a secure chamber, scanning each for redundancy, making backups on isolated systems, in case someone tried to erase them. But beneath the methodical work, a storm churned in his mind. Sat in the pilot's seat, staring blankly at the stars that blinked quietly in the black distance. Each one holding secrets, each one now a reminder of what had been forgotten for so long. The AI assistant aboard the ship calmly reported an incoming encrypted message. The seal was official, stamped by the Human Central Council, but Darren had already guessed it was not the kind of message he had been hoping for. It opened automatically, and a deep voice spoke with mechanical calm, ordering all excavation to stop and demanding full transmission of any materials recovered. The voice carried no curiosity, only control, and Darren felt the cold fingers of fear wrap around his chest. There was no interest in studying the truth, no wonder, no excitement, only silence and suppression. Darren closed the message and stared at his own reflection in the black screen of the console. His eyes looked different, sharper, older. His heart told him what his mind had already feared. They were not just trying to stop the excavation. They were trying to silence what had been found forever. He knew he could not trust the council, not anymore. He opened a hidden channel only used in emergencies, and sent a scrambled message to an old contact, someone who had once been a researcher. Before becoming a ghost in the data world, she might not answer, but she was the only one who might help him understand the depth of what he had found. The night grew longer, and Darren could not sleep. He paced the narrow halls of the ship again and again, passing the same blinking lights, the same silent panels, the same humming circuits that once gave him comfort. Now they gave him unease, like something was watching, listening, breathing in the dark. He returned to the vault at dawn, unable to stay away. The cavern was silent as before, but the air felt more alive. Something unseen stirred deep in the stone walls, not threatening, but alert, like a guardian long asleep, now slowly waking. He moved carefully until he reached the pillar again, and as he placed his hand upon it, a soft vibration passed through his skin and bones. The light returned, and the room opened with a new pulse, not just memory now, but presence. Figure emerged from the projection, not physical, not entirely visible. It stood tall, its features flickering with changing shapes. Not one race, not one face, but many blended into something human, and more than human. It looked at him not with eyes, but with knowing, and spoke in a voice that felt like wind and thunder mixed together. You are not the first, it said. The being introduced itself as a guide, a memory imprint left behind by the first ones. Its name was not spoken in words, but in a wave of thought that felt like home. It explained that the planet was once a core world of the first human empire, before the Great Fall, long before Earth had even cooled enough to bear life after a terrible war with beings who feared their light. The surviving humans hid their legacy in scattered worlds and erased all paths that led to Earth. They sealed the knowledge behind layers of time and silence, trusting that one day someone would return. Darren listened in silence, unable to speak. The guide showed him visions of starships that dwarfed planets of cities, made of light floating in space of a galaxy, once balanced by human wisdom and courage. And then it showed the fall, betrayal, fire. Silence, extinction. Earth had been the final safe place, a forgotten cradle, where the last seed of the first ones was planted without memory, without pride, but with a second chance. Tears welled in Darren's eyes as he watched the faces of the last survivors board the ship that would take them to Earth. They were tired, broken, stripped of power, but not of spirit. They carried a hope that one day the truth would be found again. Guide paused and looked at him through the light of memory and asked the question that rang louder than any warning. What will you do with this truth? Darren could not answer immediately. His thoughts were a hurricane of wonder, fear, sorrow, and burning resolve. He knew this truth could not be buried again. It belonged to all of humanity, not to councils or governments or silent halls filled with fear. It belonged to every child, every wanderer, every thinker who had ever looked at the stars and wondered where they came from. He walked out of the vault feeling both burdened and freed. The ship waited silently above, like a witness to his decision. He boarded and locked the doors, then turned off the beacon. He would not wait for the council to act. He would move to the outer relay satellites and upload the data to independent archives across the galaxy. Let the people see it. Let them decide. As he plotted the course, the AI inside the ship asked if he was sure once released, the truth could never be taken back. It could shake alliances. It could change identities. It could start wars or awaken peace. Darren looked at the screen and felt the weight of a million lost voices behind him. They gave us the stars, he whispered. Now we must remember who we are. And with that, he activated the engines and left the dead planet behind, carrying the past into the future. The ship glided through silent space as Darren stared at the wide emptiness stretched before him, a canvas of black, sprinkled with ancient light. He no longer looked at stars the same way. Each one seemed to carry a whisper, some long-lost memory buried under time and silence. Ever since the vault had revealed its secret, something in his chest refused to rest. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing the truth he carried could break worlds or bind them closer than ever before. He reached the outer relay satellite, near the edge of neutral space, far from council eyes, far from controlled systems. Here he could transmit to the open galactic networks, those built by explorers and thinkers not governed by empire or law. He connected the memory crystals into the archive core and activated the sequence. As the files began to copy, a soft hum filled the ship, like a heart beginning to beat after a long slumber. While the data flowed, he sat back and stared at the cracked photograph on the console. It was old and faded. The faces smiling in it were ordinary human faces, but now they looked different to him. They were not just people from Earth. They were descendants of something ancient, something once great, something purposely hidden from themselves. As he waited, the guide from the vault reappeared, projected through the ship's systems. The light of its form flickered gently, and the air around it shimmered with a strange warmth. It spoke again, not with command, but with the calm certainty of a truth that had been waiting patiently through the centuries. Guide began to show more visions this time, deeper, older memories, ones stored not only in crystal, but within the code of humanity itself. It revealed how the first ones rose in a time when galaxies still danced close to each other, when life bloomed in every corner of the stars. Humans were not born from a single world. They were seeded across the stars by forces older than any name, a spark of balance, a bridge between creation and chaos. They had built wonders, machines that could weave planets into living structures, minds that connected across systems without words or wires. They did not rule, they guided, they protected, they healed. But as always, light brings shadow, and there were those who saw the strength of the first ones, not as wisdom, but as threat. These beings feared unity, feared peace, feared a future where no one held power over others. And so they came in secret, wearing masks of allies, speaking words of agreement, while planting seeds of doubt. The War was not fought with armies at first. It began with betrayal, sabotage, distortion of memory, poisoning of truth, and when the first ones finally saw the danger, it was already inside their walls. The cities fell not with fire, but with silence. Records were burned, stars were collapsed, and in the end, only fragments of their legacy remained, scattered in vaults, hidden in coded ruins, sealed in bloodlines that no longer remembered who they were. Aaron felt each vision like a dream, have remembered each face, a reflection of someone he might have known if time had taken a different path. The guide explained that Earth had never been the birthplace, but the final shelter. A world chosen not for its strength, but for its hidden nature. A blue world, quiet and young, where the last seeds of the first ones could sleep safely until the stars were ready to welcome them again. He sat in silence, his breath slow, his heart loud. The truth was no longer theory, it was history. The kind that reshapes identity from the roots. He thought of every lesson, every book, every story told about human origin, primitive creatures crawling out of oceans, building fire, drawing on caves, eventually reaching the stars. Slowly, step by step, proudly unaware of the truth, that they were walking back to a place they once ruled. Realized now why the council wanted silence. They were not only afraid of chaos, they were afraid of change, afraid that humanity would stop following and start remembering. The guide looked at him, and its voice became softer, like wind moving through an old forest, and it asked again, not what he would do, but what they would become. He knew that once this message spread, there would be no going back. Some would call it lies, others would worship it, many would question their faith, their science, their place in the galaxy, but the silence would end, and in its place would come questions, fire, unity, division, maybe even war, but also awakening. Watched as the last data file completed its transmission across the relay satellites. He sent copies to independent archives, ancient listening stations, forgotten outposts, to ensure no one voice could erase them all. It was done. He leaned back and breathed deeply, as if something heavy had left his chest for the first time. He felt not lost in the universe, but connected, part of a legacy that had touched stars before maps even existed, a legacy that now stirred again through him. Suddenly, the console lit up a new signal, incoming, fast, sharp, encrypted, but not hostile. He opened it, and a familiar voice broke through, someone he had not heard in years. It was Mira, the researcher who had vanished into the digital underground. Her voice sounded older, worn, but alive. She had seen the data, and now she knew. She whispered only one sentence, and it struck deeper than anything the guide had said. They buried us in silence, but they forgot we are made of memory. Darren closed his eyes and smiled, not with pride, but with peace. He had started something he could no longer control, but that was the point. The truth was never meant to be controlled, only remembered. The ship moved quietly through space, now not in escape, but in return. A journey toward something forgotten now, waking again, one spark at a time. Stars did not shine the same anymore. Across the wide net of space, the silence had broken. The message had reached corners. Darren never imagined it. Moved like fire through dry grass, slipping past firewalls, dodging sensors, bouncing between satellites, touching every network that was still free from control. Scholars, scientists, wanderers, people who had spent their lives searching for meaning, now stared in disbelief at the truth that had arrived, not in thunder, but in soft light, not in threats, but in memory. Across colonies and distant stations, there was confusion and wonder. Some cried while others shouted, some denied while others stood silent and shook with emotion. Stories long forgotten suddenly began to make sense. Dreams that felt too ancient to be real now carried weight. People began to ask questions, not just about who they were, but why they had been lied to for so long. But not all reactions came from awe. In the halls of power, where history was a weapon and silence a tool, the truth struck like a crack through glass. Council chambers buzzed with panic. Private meetings filled with shouting. Leaders stared at each other, not with unity, but suspicion and fear. They had built their order on the belief that humanity was young, a child among giants, a guest in the galaxy. If that belief shattered, so too would the foundation. Beneath their feet, some races feared the return of the first ones, not because they believed in their myths, but because they saw what the idea could awaken in the hearts of ordinary humans. The courage, the pride, the will to rise again and claim what had been theirs before memory was stolen. Soon Darren's name spread across channels. Some saw him as a hero, others as a threat. Some called him a liar. Some demanded his arrest, but most simply whispered his name with the weight of hope or the chill of fear. And Earth protests began quiet. And then louder. People gathered not to fight, but to ask, to know, to remember. They held signs with words like, "Who are we, and why were we hidden, and what comes next?" Darren watched from the ship as the waves of awakening rippled outward. Some planets declared full access to the data, others banned it entirely. Some teachers began rewriting their lessons, while others were fired for speaking. The new history ships were launched toward the ancient world where Darren had found the vault. Some carried peace and science, others carried weapons and orders to erase every trace of the past before it reached more minds. Darren saw the signals coming toward him fast, and many not just from humans, but from other races who had once been ruled, guided, or saved by the first ones. The galaxy no longer turned in quiet rhythm, it pulsed with change, and somewhere beneath the noise ancient memories stirred in places long abandoned, as if the stars themselves had begun to listen again. He had only one choice left. He could run and hide, or he could face the storm with the truth in his hands. He chose the second without hesitation. He returned to the ancient world and landed once again near the ruins. The planet greeted him not with fear, but familiarity. The stone pillars rose from the dust, and the golden patterns on the ground pulsed again with gentle light. The guide appeared as soon as he stepped into the chamber. But it was not alone. This time more lights appeared, not human, not alien, but something in between. Old guardians awakened by the spread of memory. They did not speak in words, but in presence. Darren felt their emotion like waves, calm and steady. They did not come to fight. They came to stand as witness to what would follow. Above the surface, the sky turned silver. The first wave of ships entered orbit. Some tried to hail him with orders, others with warnings, but Darren ignored them. He activated the vault once more, this time fully, and the walls trembled with energy. A beam of light shot into the sky, not as a weapon, but as a signal. It carried memory far and wide, a message carved into stars we remember, and far away in places where ancient structures had slept for ages, lights began to flicker. Codes long locked began to unlock. Other vaults, other truths started to awaken. Council ships reacted fast. They began firing toward the vault, sending missiles through the clouds, trying to bury the truth again. But the planet responded. Shields of ancient design flared around the ruins, not made of metal or energy, but of memory and intention. Missiles vanished before touching the ground, dissolved into harmless light. The Council forces paused, unsure, afraid. No longer the masters of this moment, Darren stood inside the vault and raised his eyes toward the hollow sky. He knew they could see him through their lenses, and he wanted them to see his face, calm, determined, human. Opened all channels and spoke clearly to every system, every ship, every station that still listened. He told them, this truth does not belong to me or to any one person. It belongs to us all. It is not a weapon. It is a mirror. If you are afraid of what it shows, then ask yourself why. He did not speak long. He let the silence carry the weight of what had been done and what must now be undone. Across the stars, people listened. Some turned away. Some turned toward each other, but no one could say they did not hear. The vault pulsed once more, and the guide faded into the air. Its final message left in Darren's mind, not in fear, not in sorrow, but in peace. The past does not chain the future, it lights the way. And as the last word settled in his thoughts, the sky above the ancient planet glowed brighter than ever, not with war, but with memory returning home. The planet stood calm under a sky that no longer belonged to silent ships circled above, waiting with restless engines, some ready to destroy, others unsure whether to listen or leave. A moment hung heavy in the air, as if the whole galaxy held its breath. Darren stood in the center of the vault, not as a soldier, not as a ruler, not even as a rebel. He stood simply as one who remembered and would not allow forgetting to win. Beams of light still pulsed from the ancient structures, carrying memory across every system, every corner of known space. The relays through broken satellites, even through damaged old stations. The message reached countless minds, some young, some old, some still clinging to the old beliefs that humans were newcomers, explorers, who had just stepped onto the galactic stage. Now all of them saw something else. Not myth, not rumor, but living memory shaped in light, sound, and truth. In distant planets, children asked questions. Their teachers could no longer answer. Elders wept as they recalled stories once told in hushed voices, tales their ancestors had shared before fear silenced them. Entirely a few began to sing songs that had no known origin, as if something deep in their blood had always remembered something their minds had only just begun to see again. The human council fractured. Some members resigned, unable to carry the weight of the lie. Others demanded action, still hoping to crush the fire before it spread too far, too fast. But it was too late. The fire was already in the hearts of the people, not burning in rage, but glowing in awakening. By one, smaller colonies raised their own flags, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. They sent messages of unity, not submission, offers to join together, not under fear, but shared purpose, not a new empire, but a rebirth of truth among the alien world's. Responses were mixed. Some remembered the kindness of the first ones and stepped forward with open hands. Others, whose ancestors had once fought against the old humans, braced for retaliation. Though none came, no threats, no armies, no conquest, only a quiet, unwavering message of who they had been and who they still could be inside the ancient vault. Darren walked through the glowing chambers, each step echoing through stone and memory. The Guardians remained silent, watching him with presence, not judgment. They had seen ages past, wars rise and vanish, planets bloom and fall. Now they watched one more soul choose a path, not for power, but for purpose. A soft voice reached him through the ship's comms. It was Mira. Once again, her voice filled with something close to awe. She told him that the transmissions had reached deep space. Even the forgotten zones near the edge of explored systems were now sending back signals. Humans who had left centuries ago, humans who never knew the story, had found their piece of the puzzle and were coming home. Darren looked up at the sky above the vault, through the ancient ceiling that opened like a window to the stars. More ships had arrived, but none had fired, none had moved to erase. Instead, they hovered in quiet orbit, as if waiting for something bigger than orders, waiting for a reason to stop fearing and start listening. He walked to the center platform where the oldest beacon stood, tall, made not of metal but crystal, and thought it strange how something so fragile in appearance had outlived empires. He reached out and placed his hand against its surface. The beacon responded instantly, and the sky above changed. Across the galaxy, stars lit up in patterns that had been dark for generations. Space folded and revealed long hidden structures. Satellites once cloaked by ancient technology now activated, and aligned. Memory awakened everywhere. And it was not just data, it was music, art, language, story. Entire libraries that had waited in silence now opened like petals in spring. The humans of Earth watched in silence from their cities and skies. Messages poured down in waves, holograms of faces not quite like theirs, but familiar in the way family is familiar from long ago. Voices spoken every language from across time, offering not command but guidance, not laws but stories. Darren stood at the heart of it all, quiet as the galaxy breathed in this new light, not because he sought to be seen, but because he had already done what needed to be done. He turned to the Guardian, who remained at his side, still glowing with that soft inner light. The Guardian spoke not in sound, but in a thought that held both warmth and farewell. This is not the end, it said. This is a beginning. The people will decide what to do with the truth. Some will rise, some will stumble, but now they will walk forward with eyes open. They will not be chained by silence again. They are no longer just survivors, they are heirs. Darren left the vault slowly, and the door behind him closed without a sound, not as a prison, but as a promise, kept his ship welcomed. Him with the same hum it always had, but now that sound carried, meaning it was not the sound of escape, it was the sound of return. He looked once more at the stars, not with doubt, but with quiet strength. The truth had not broken the galaxy, it had unburied it. It reminded the stars of their first voice, the one carried in human blood, memory, and will. As he set course for Earth, a voice from an approaching ship called to him, a young voice, nervous, but filled with something bright. The pilot asked if it was true, if they really came from the stars, long before any of them were born, and Darren smiled and answered, not as a leader, not as a symbol, just as a man who had seen. We never left the stars, he said. We only forgot, and now we remember. And the stars seemed to shine brighter than ever before the end.